Welcome to Roger That, a podcast presented by HVAF of Indiana. I'm your host, Lauren Carpenter, and join me as we discuss how HVAF is ending veteran homelessness and how you can join us in our mission. We'll be having conversations with community partners, staff members, and even some of the veterans we serve. We hope sharing more of our story with supporters like you can shine a light and give a voice to this vulnerable population, because no hero should ever be homeless. Before we get into today's episode, here's how your support helped Hoosier Heroes last month. In May, 110 veterans received temporary housing, and 177 veterans received rent and utility assistance to prevent them from becoming homeless. 15 veterans were enrolled in our employment services. These services include resume help, interview training, and job referrals. 207 veterans visited our pantry, where veterans received essential food, clothing, and hygiene items. And so far in 2024, we have served 898 veterans, and we know we couldn't serve this many Hoosier Heroes without your support. So thank you for donating, volunteering, following us on social media, and being a part of the Roger That community. If you've been listening to Roger That all season long, then you will hear a familiar voice on today's episode. A few episodes ago, I shared about our legislative efforts to try to make it illegal for landlords to deny veterans using vouchers for their housing. And on that episode, I spoke with Amy Nelson, who is the Executive Director of Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. Amy came to Indiana in 2011 to be the first Executive Director of Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, as it was founded the same year. Their mission is to ensure equal housing opportunities by eliminating housing discrimination through advocacy, enforcement, education, and outreach. If you'd like to hear more about Amy and the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, then stay tuned, because here's my interview with Amy. All right, so I know you've been in this fair housing, field for a while. You've been at fair housing for 12 and a half years. If you just want to tell us a little bit more about your experience in this field, kind of like why you got involved and why you stay involved.
So I actually started in fair housing back in December of 1997 and was brought here to Indiana to start up a fair housing organization because Indiana did not have a nonprofit advocacy-based group working exclusively on housing issues, and that's actually fairly unique. Ohio has 9 groups, Michigan has 6, and Illinois has 7 or 8, depending upon how you count them up. But there was nothing here in Indiana. So we started back in 2011, getting this group up and running, and I'm very proud of where it is. Still so much work left to do, so much that we want to get done, but having a group here focused exclusively on fair housing, I think, is to the betterment of Hoosiers across Indiana.
Since then, are there more fair housing centers here in Indiana, or is it Central Indiana the only one?
Unfortunately, we are still the only one. We do have Central in our name, so Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. We cover 24 counties, so essentially the Indianapolis metro area, and then the counties going out to the Ohio border is what we do. It's my dream someday that we'll have a group in the north and a group in the south. It's much better than us being a statewide organization to have other groups we could partner with, particularly on public policy issues. But we're going to have to, wait and see. It hasn't happened yet, but it's my hope before I end my career that there's more than one group here in Indiana.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So what all does your organization do for fair housing?
So we have 4 main programs that help explain the work that we do. The backbone of our work is our advocacy program. This is where we investigate allegations of housing discrimination. If somebody feels that they were treated differently by a landlord or a mortgage lender because of things like race, color, national origin, religion, disability, presence of children in the home, gender, religion, those type of reasons that you were treated differently. And this covers any sort of housing-based transactions, rental, sales, lending, zoning, insurance. So in that program, we receive complaints from individuals who feel that they might have been discriminated against. We will conduct investigations, and if we uncover violations of fair housing law, we will help them in navigating a process to get justice for what occurred to them. But we also do systemic-based work, so we don't necessarily just wait for the complaints to come to us. We also go out looking for it, especially when it comes to long-term systemic policies and challenging that. Then we have our education program, which is where we're trying to get the word out about fair housing laws, educating the public, trainings, conferences, social media, publications, websites, all those sorts of things. Then we have our public policy program, which is where we try to be active in the Indiana General Assembly in particular to try to advance fair housing or broader housing laws from the basis of a consumer. And then finally, we have our Inclusive Communities program, which is where we try to give back. At different times, we've been able to negotiate into our case settlements that the respondent has to make donations to certain nonprofits, or that we get funds to be able to provide grants to certain nonprofits working on housing issues or neighborhood stabilization. Those don't happen frequently enough, but we're excited when we are able to negotiate that and get some funds to our needed partners.
Yeah, looking back at these last 12 and a half years being here in Central Indiana, what are some, I guess, accomplishments maybe that you're just proud of, some steps forward that you've been able to take, initiatives you've been able to done that you're proud of?
I really, first of all, our intake and our investigative teams, because we answer every call.
Okay.
We are an organization, we return every call, and sometimes those are very tough conversations because people have been passed around or other groups haven't returned those calls. We will return. Now, it doesn't mean that we can help you because we are very defined on fair housing issues. So we can't get involved in landlord-tenant disputes, for instance, or finding somebody housing, those type of programs. But we will tell you who the resources are for you in doing that. So I'm very proud of the fact our intake team spends a lot of time with people in trying to make sure that they have the resources if it's not a fair housing violation issue. And then I'm also very proud of our systemic team, where our organization, despite our small size, has been taking on zoning issues and lending issues that it's one of the few groups in the country who's been challenging on these very complicated technical issues. I'm also very proud of our education and outreach team, which had our biggest year last year yet for a number of presentations, number of type of programs that we have offered. And we have been highlighted at the national level by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development because of our education program and the work that is done under that particular program. And I'm excited the fact that our team has grown. We were 5 staff for 10 years. And in the last 2.5 years here, we've been able to add 4 additional team members, and that has made a lot of difference in the work that we're able to do and the types of investigations in particular we are able to work on.
Yeah, that's great. What have you seen since, I guess, compared to 2011 to now, 2024? What, changes, either good or bad, have you seen in, the housing market, just with fair housing, anything that you've seen that's how it's changed over these years?
Unfortunately, the housing market has gotten more critical in our state. It's been a very quick progression to where we are, and it just doesn't seem like it's getting better anytime soon. And that's both if you are a renter as well as a wannabe homeowner. The market is very tight. It's been going up, and wages have not been keeping pace. Whether you're a renter or a homeowner. We've seen investors coming into the market that have taken out single-family homes that make it so that those in rentals aren't able to move into home ownership as easily as they did in the past. That means then that keeps the rent market tightened because there aren't those individuals moving out of rentals and into home ownership. And we've also seen a deterioration of basically our quality of housing. Substandard housing conditions have increased. The calls that we receive, about that, or the situations that certainly we read about, that has been continued to be problematic. So rising costs, whether that's home ownership or rental, substandard housing conditions, and of course, from our perspective, we continue to see, rising numbers of types of housing discrimination.
So seeing that it's gotten worse, how are you guys combating that?
One of the things that we've been trying to do is get more information out to the public. One is that to educate the public on the issues, particularly those who maybe have never been housing insecure, to understand what others are going through, to try to get that information out, have it be very localized for persons who are reading it, that they aren't reading about something that's a national report, for instance, it's something localized. So starting about 1.5 years ago, we started issuing reports We've issued reports on mortgage lending. We've identified banks who are not performing at levels that they should be performing. We've identified landlords who are evicting at high rates. We released a report on the impact of out-of-state investors on our single-family housing market. That helps people understand that they are not alone in the experience that they might be going through, and that there are potential opportunities to band together to change some of these policies and practices in our state, because that's the only way we're going to be able to do that, is by having more individuals speak up about not only their situation, but for others as well.
Yeah, and I live, outside of Marion County, so I kind of can see it how sometimes those donut counties are a little bit of their own bubbles, and their little communities. What do you say to them for them to care about this issue, even if it doesn't affect them?
Unfortunately, we're also seeing the same problem escalating in the donut counties, where that used to be places that you could potentially go to find some affordable housing options. Those are gone too. And the investors have been particularly targeting the suburban counties on single family homes. So it's a crisis that's also, hitting there as well. One of the things that we did a couple years ago was we put together an exhibit called Unwelcomed, A Fair Housing History of Sales and Lending Discrimination. And it's been traveling each month to different locations since April of 2022 to educate the public about systemic policies and practices that are still impacting our neighborhoods today. It's very focused on Indianapolis, and it talks about redlining, racial covenants, blockbusting. And these are terms that we have found here, particularly in recent years, that people aren't aware of. They don't have this knowledge of this history of discrimination due to race, color, ethnicity, and sometimes religion as well, that not only was a national problem, but was a problem here in our state and in our communities. And so then you look at, why do we have some neighborhoods or even the suburbs that don't receive adequate investment? It's because of this long history of discrimination that has kept so many people out of home ownership opportunities, or the ability to build generational wealth, or the fact that they had to stay renters. They had no option if they wanted to become a homeowner, or they were targets of predatory lending practices that took away homes that they had worked hard for. So we try to tell that story and get them engaged in a way that educates them on the subject, but then also says, and here's a call for action. Here's how you can help rectify these things. And we need your help because you're a powerful voice.
Yeah. And, now tying with HVAF, have you seen any trends with veterans having issues with housing? Or do you maybe trying to the calls you take, or, things that you've seen out on the field?
I think when it comes to those veterans that contact us, unfortunately, it's the same type of problems and struggles that we hear from others, at least from our perspective of that, is can't find anywhere to live, can't afford the rent, landlords evicting them because they complained about a repair issue, can't find somewhere with a voucher, whatever it might be. These are consistent across vulnerable populations and or individuals that, again, just struggle to be able to find safe, affordable, long-term housing. We worked, with Representative Renee Pack this last session to try to get, HB 1087 to go through. Unfortunately, it didn't. But it is to make it illegal for landlords to discriminate against veterans who are trying to use those vouchers for housing. I know that you have seen this sort of law in place in other states. So could you tell us about that and just how it's been effective? There's a growing number of states that have passed some form of source of income protection or receipt of public assistance type protections. It can be called different things under different legislation. I think we're up to 15 states now that have passed some form, and then there's over 70 metropolitan areas that have passed it at a local level. And what that ensures is that as long as you otherwise meet the requirements of the housing, landlord could require a good landlord reference, for instance. That would still apply to you. But if you meet those requirements, whatever those are, you can't be denied housing just because your rent may be being paid through a voucher type program or some other forms of rental assistance. So that's how those programs have been very effective. And I also need to point out always when I'm talking to legislators or to the public about this is not a blue versus red issue. North Dakota, Utah, Oklahoma, what we would consider very red states, have had these protections in place. In fact, have had these protections in some cases in place for a very long time because they were needed to ensure that people were able to find housing who were the most vulnerable in at risk of homelessness and being able to find safe housing that they could live in. And the true dream of the voucher program is to get people out of poverty by providing that voucher that then allows them to not have to worry as much about their rent payment. And then they can focus on other things, employment, education, caring for their kids, whatever it is. And then that leads to where they can then get out of poverty and get out of the voucher, or their kids can get into good school districts or whatever it might be. That was the dream of the voucher program. But unfortunately, if a housing provider can say, no, I'm not going to rent to you, just because that's how your rent is going to get paid, no other reason, just because of that, that then leads people to be driven back into higher poverty areas that they may have been wanting to leave, that then doesn't fit the dream of the voucher, being able to get somebody out of poverty.
So is there anything else you want to share about why you think it's important that, maybe the next session, why this bill should be looked at more and should be passed?
Absolutely, because as anytime housing markets restrict, where there's less housing units available, unfortunately, discrimination goes up. Housing providers get to be picky. And very often it's where they allow, unfortunately, biases or stereotypes to have an impact that may not be warranted in anything. I have been in this since 1997. Voucher holders, only 1 in 4 people who are eligible for a voucher will ever get one in their lifetime. 1 out of 4. Somebody gets a voucher, they are going to hold on to that voucher. They just want their property to meet basic living conditions. And they, when they complain about that, then they risk then losing their voucher because the housing authority will stop paying that voucher in a way to try to get that landlord to make the repair. But the landlord refuses to make the repair. That family is out on the street trying to find somewhere else with their voucher. And then unfortunately, very often that landlord re-rents that unit without making the repair to somebody without a voucher. So this is a problem in our community that we all need to be talking about, that it is needed. And this is about helping those who just need a little extra help. These are programs that are available that are underfunded, and it's important that we support them and allow them to work effectively. And right now, there are so many barriers to them being able to work effectively.
What are some other barriers that you think is important for us to address and remove?
I would like to see, certainly the voucher program or any sort of source of income receipt of public assistance program, that if it's possible to focus not only on veterans, but the more broader, what we call a Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher program, we could potentially also look at trying to protect with other rental assistance type programs. We ran into this during COVID, where individuals were eligible to get rent paid through rental assistance programs, but some landlords were refusing that rent. And then that resulted in people having evictions on their records for non-payment of rent, when their rent could have been paid. And then that eviction then follows them around to the next place, and they're denied housing because of that eviction. And I'd like to see, this be something that is, more statewide, or that if it can't be statewide, that we allow cities to make individual choices to what's needed for their particular constituents. What might be needed in a Fort Wayne, Indiana, may be different than a Bedford, Indiana. But we need to allow cities to be able to decide what is best as it relates to housing needs for its constituents.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me and with our listeners. Just want to be able to give you an opportunity on both ends. If there's someone who is feeling like they're discriminated against, they need that support and help, or if there's someone who's listening and they want to join in this cause, how can they contact you?
You can call our number 317-644-0673. You can also go to our website at FHCCI.org. We have a lot of materials on our website. You can also email us at info@FHCCI.org as well. If you want to get active on housing issues, one of the great places to start is the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. That's a coalition of groups. We belong to that are working on these broader housing issues, particularly in the State House. We'd encourage you to sign up for their alerts, but you can also follow us on social media. We try to keep people updated, particularly during the General Assembly, on issues. We have a public policy page. Lastly, if you want to do something in housing, we are always looking for what we call fair housing testers. These are secret shoppers who help us in uncovering housing discrimination. You are looking for the same sort of information anybody else would be looking for. How much is rent? What is the deposit, etc. The only thing different here is that sometimes you might have a profile where you have a child, or you have somebody with a disability in the household, and then you just type it all up afterwards. We always need more of fair housing testers.
Awesome. Is there anything else on this topic that you think I missed? Do you think it would be important to share?
The only thing I'll say is just thanks for HVAF for all the work that you've been doing. It was great to see you take an interest on this particular issue last session. Again, with more groups like yours speaking out, we can make progress. And I have seen that in recent years in the State House, where more and more organizations and individuals are coming together. The movement for fair housing has just grown so substantially in our state, but we need a few more. Mm-hmm. It's not there yet, but each year it gets bigger. And thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. That wraps up this episode of Roger That. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to Roger That on wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at HVAF of Indiana. And for even more stories on HVAF and the veterans that we serve, check out our blog on our website at hvaf.org. Thank you, and until no hero is homeless, we'll see you next time on Roger That, a podcast presented by HVAF of Indiana.